Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, so future flight deck and the pilot. I'm going to start off. For those of you who are extremely observant, you may notice that the title of my presentation is very, very slightly different to the one in your... okay, so the very slight difference is I changed it from the future flight deck and the pilot's role to the pilot role. But I don't want you to start off by thinking that I have anything to do with the number of pilots in that comment. It's not 3, it's not 2, it's not 1, it's not 0. It's just that we felt, and I thought it was amusing, that grammatically it was more correct to talk about the pilot role rather than the pilot's role. So, now you see the theme that I'm going to work on here. So I'm just going to work through a few things. This is my agenda today. I've got a lot of things to talk about, some quite funny things, some exciting things, and various bits and pieces. So let's press on. We've talked quite a lot about this today. Some people have shown slides already. We talk today, and we have done for a few years, about the human-machine interface. There's a very important aspect of aircraft and cockpit design. This is kind of where we started in Airbus. This is our famous carousel picture that we've used in presentations. Mike's used a few times. There are a few jokes about this flight deck. But one of the interesting things, and this came up in a conversation casually yesterday, as far back as 1968, this particular aircraft was certified Cat 3. Now you just think about where we've come from that point then to where we are today, and how it's transformed into this kind of vision that we have in flight deck today. And it's all about HMI, it's all about the human-machine interface, what it was. And what I want to show you is, and again, thank you for Mike for pointing out, this is purely an engineer's idea of what the flight deck will look like. The fact that there are no pilots sitting there, they're not standing up and taking the picture, it is purely for artistic impressions. I want to show you another view, and the reason I want to show you another view of this flight deck is the first impression you get when you sit down in an A350 flight deck, which is our vision of the short-term future, is not that one, but this one. It's suddenly much more open and brighter and bigger windows and that sort of thing. In fact, when you sit there, you suddenly feel quite exposed because there's more window than a pilot of my size has been used to for a very long time. And it's quite interesting this because it gives you a completely different impression of the environment around you. So it's a different flight deck. It's commonality, of course, we work on that, but also this huge vision. We reached a milestone very recently. I like this picture because a few of my friends on Facebook thought it was hysterical. Very major point in the 350 design cycle. This was electrical power on for the first day. Very exciting, it worked, we switched the switch and electricity flowed and things happened. No, we have not got a funky new design of blue side stick. And forgive me for this joke, for those of you who are British, it's nothing that's come from Ann Summers or anything like that, even though it might look like it. In fact, it's just a protective little rubbery blue cover during transportation. Equally, we haven't forgotten the seats, it's just electrical power on, okay? So, moving on from that, I want to talk about where we are going next with design, as much as I can, as much as I can. This is actually not a real picture, it's an artist impression of what we call aircraft -1. You understand that in the history of an aircraft, there's aircraft number 1, but before that, there's what we call aircraft 0, which is sometimes known as the Iron Bird. It's a very funky simulator linked up to, in fact, some real components, real wings, real ailerons, real undercarriage, and we work it so that it's the only simulation in the world where you move a side stick and real ailerons move. It's an extraordinarily expensive research tool. But before that is aircraft -1. An aircraft -1 is a bunch of computers. There are no black boxes or anything like that. It looks very much like this, and it feels very much like the real aircraft. And we spend hours, hundreds, thousands of hours flying this. Years before the aircraft actually flies, we fly this to make sure it works. What are we looking at? Well, we're trying to optimize the relationship between the crew and the cockpit. Okay, this is a very important point. We're optimizing the relationship. We now talk about it as a relationship with all of the positives and negatives that relationships have. Obviously, we're looking at things like safety, performance, health and safety, you're going to bump your head, and the overall efficiency of using this device. But we also talk about, is it easy to adapt to? And we test for this over hour after hour and hour of testing. And we look at the human errors. Is the design actually reducing the number of human errors? Is it making it easier to track human errors? Are they critical human errors? Is it comfortable? And the answer to that, to start off with, is definitely no. Does it simplify the task? We won't put something in here unless it actually helps, if it simplifies. And overall, is it easy to use? And we group them all together as a kind of a new type of human-machine interface. And that's what I want to explore next. We talk about the intuitive nature of the design now. This is extremely important to us. For most of you, you'll instantly understand what I mean when I talk about intuitive design. But the next point you probably won't have heard of. This is our buzzword now for aircraft design. Is it ecological? And I'm going to explain ecological design in a moment. It's nothing to do with can you reuse it. It's nothing to do with green. So, I'm going to take you back to the classroom, and I'm going to explain what ecological interface design is. So, started by a guy called Kim Vincent, who's still around, Canadian, absolutely brilliant work, and Jens Rasmussen, and they worked at RISO, which is the national laboratory in Denmark. Scary university, they've got a nuclear reactor on campus. They talked and did some seminal research on human system reliability, particularly the very complex human environment that we now find ourselves in. Not just for aviation, but a lot of the work was very, they did a lot of work for nuclear reactor controls, you know, Homer Simpson's kind of thing. And they did a lot of work in areas that immediately resonated with us as design. So they talked about skills, rules, and knowledge. Now that sounds very familiar, Carrie, doesn't it? Knowledge, skills, and attitude. And they built a framework upon that, and from a lot of their work we derive knowledge, skills, and attitude. The work is fascinating because these guys looked at enhancing the user interface to increase human reliability in machine interaction, especially in complex environments. But if you want to twist that around into something that we understand as pilots, they want to design for the crew. And that's the key message. Ecological design is not about a human-machine interface. We've left that behind. It's the crew interface with this tool, not the individual human being, but as a team. And that's the next step, and that's what we're working to now. We don't really talk about HMI, we talk about this ecological interface. How do we test it? Well, this is really interesting. This is a lot of work that we've done with the EASA and the FAA recently. I must admit it was great fun. How do we evaluate this kind of human interaction? Well, we test it to death. We test it with real people. We gathered a group of individuals about a year and a half ago from all over the world, 4 airlines, and it's confidential who they were, but they were line pilots. 2 crews from Airbus training, including me, and 1 group of test pilots as a, how could you do it if you did it really well? They made me say that. And also, dare I say, 1 crew from the authority as well. So we brought all these people together to test this evaluation, a total of 8 crews that period of time. And from that testing, we flew missions. In a very short period of time, we learned to fly the Airbus A350, an aircraft that doesn't exist, and we flew it from Paris to New York with all sorts of failures. Did it work? Did the crew like it? Did they enjoy it? And we tested it hour after hour after hour after hour. But from that, we gained some really useful insights into the future of pilot training, which is why I mention it here, and the design of our aircraft. So stop for a minute, think about the last time you got a new mobile phone. How did you learn how to use it? Be really honest with yourself now. Okay? And since we're mostly pilots, let's do an exam. Option A, answer A. Did you read the manual for 3 days and then do 50 exam questions and only then pick it up? No. Not one person has ever said yes, and if I ever meet somebody who says yes, I'll worry out. Answer B, did you immediately pick up the phone and just try to use it? Damn it, yeah, most people say yes then. I actually don't think that's quite the answer, but it's very close to it. Did you ask a friend? No. Yeah, okay, 1 or 2 people say you asked a friend. Or there's always an answer D, isn't there, in a pilot exam? Always answer D, it was none of the above. Well, actually, it's none of the above. In reality, what you probably did was pick up the quick user guide, figure out how to put the battery in, ignore the bit about charging it for 24 hours first, and then you try to send a text. It's kind of a split, isn't it? Right. That is because that's your preferred method of learning. And it's true for nearly everybody. And it's absolutely true for pilots. Is that reflected in what we do today? No. Will it be? We're going to try. So we've built a lot of what we are going to put into the training of the A350 from that experience from testing it. We call it the functional approach. We actually stole it from some work done by a guy called Stick in the US Navy back in 75, 76. It's probably the wrong pronunciation, Dieter, sorry. It was very interesting. His paper was adult learning in the US military, which was quite worrying because what do they do for the children who learn within the US military? He talked about this being much more efficient, much more effective, and absolutely much more fun. And we've all known for many years, if you can make it fun, you grab an audience. How does it work? Very, very simply, for those of you who know this little switch on an Airbus, it's almost identical on a Boeing and every other airplane that ever exists. How do you learn how to use it? Well, I can explain it to you. It's a little tiny switch which is spring-loaded in the up position. In the up position, it's the ground communication, and then it's got a neutral, which is then spring-loaded down for VHF. Not a chance. But if I gave it to you to play with, it would take you about 1 minute. Click, click, I get it. It's learning by doing. Okay, it's learning by doing, but it's very, very, very strongly linked to the design. If the design is intuitive, you will learn by doing very, very quickly and efficiently, and you'll enjoy it, and you'll remember it. And that's the power of what we learn from this type of evaluation. Why is that important? Well, because the world is becoming used to intuitive design. Intuitive design. We've just launched a big iPad thing for Airbus pilots, and we're going to be launching some more soon. Why? Because that's what people want. It's a new way to interact. You touch the thing, you touch the software. We saw pilots on the A350 reach out and touch some of the information screens, because intuitively now our world has changed, and that's what people do. You interact by touching. We did a survey that showed that amongst the pilot community, this type of technology really resonates, and the uptake is even greater than the general public. And that's interesting, because that drives what we have to do in the future. And we've reacted to this. We've tried to build this kind of intuitive design in. Now, going back to comments earlier on today, the problem is this type of design is accelerating far ahead of what we are able to keep up with through regulation. We are falling way behind. We're struggling to keep up with this leap forward. Here's an example so that you really understand what we mean by intuitive design. We now do performance on iPad, same performance we have on electronic flight bag, but it's very visual. You can touch it, you can feel it, you can interact with it. And we can do all sorts of things. So if I zoom in, this is how we now display the performance. You do it exactly the same way, but you can now see the crosswinds, you can see the ASD, you can see the resolve components. And it's a real eye-opener. When we first started using it, some of us said, hey, that's really close to the end of the runway. Yeah, it is. And look what happens when you change the weight, really makes a difference. It's so powerful and visual. And then we can do magic things that we've always wanted to do, and this is one of the runways at Toulouse. You can have instantly a pop-up of the engine out procedure, visually, graphically. So the operator can put his information on there. This is what our industry now demands, and this is what we as Airbus have to respond to. I think we've worn it out. Okay. And we started flying it in the airplane. We've tried some Wi-Fi connections so that we can start looking at instant information. One of the things that we worked on, which I didn't think was particularly helpful at all, just as a little amusing side, instead of calling the engineer on the HF, we can now do a video link. Seeing the engineer telling me what was right or wrong with the aircraft didn't help me at all, but I could see his face. Look in the eye. Say it again. So what are we going to do with this new knowledge? Okay, well, we're going to work on it. We've got a lot of things to do, but we are making some interesting steps forward. All of the iPad stuff that we've developed, and a lot of the things from the 350, we're going to feed back into our existing and near future aircraft. In particular, the A350 transition course starts with manual flying. No flight directors, no laws or protections, just raw flying. And only when you've reached competence and confidence in that, you then move on to using automation. We call it flight school. It's quite a step forward for us, but that's what we're going to do with a lot of support from the regulator and customers. Next airplane for us after, well, actually about the same time as the 350 now, with 320 neo, there's not much there. The future is an aircraft called 30X. I spend quite a bit of time working on 30X, and I'll come back to that. But before we do that, I want to explore with you what are the design drivers, what actually drives us in design today. Obviously safety, but can you give me another one? Yeah, exactly. That's the key thing. You have to accept that at the end of the day, it's money that drives a lot of this. So yes, we can make it efficient, and that's good for the environment, good for fuel saving. We can put sharplets on the new engines, that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, it's got to make money. It's got to make money for us. It's got to make money for you. If it doesn't do that, it won't be a successful aeroplane. But safety has to be there as the number one driver as well. Mike mentioned this slide. This is an Airbus slide that we use a lot. It's actually partly from us, and as Mike said, partly from industry. There are several key lessons in here, the ones that Mike has already explained, but also one more. As each generation comes in, we take a step change in safety, but it's a diminishing return. Okay, it's like the tortoise and the hare. There's a problem here, which is if the 5th generation aircraft comes in, and I don't know what defines the 5th generation, but certainly 308s will be there, it'll make it'll halve that gap again, but it won't actually make much difference to the safety record, because we've squeezed a lot out of it by design. So let's talk about that a little bit. What are we going to do to enhance today's aircraft? I built a model for a safety conference earlier this year, and this model is basically that we have an accident or a major incident. From that we derive a technology solution, and then either sometimes through legislation or not, we implement that solution, and then we feed it back to make sure we've made a difference. It's kind of how technology, as we roll along, has helped. Example, controlled flight into terrain used to be the number one big killer. So, not us Airbus, but we as an industry developed the GPWS, enhanced, that sort of thing. This kind of presentation and legislation came along and we reduced controlled flight into terrain. See how the model works? Does it make sense? So let's explore that for something else. Instrumentation, that's a good example. Look at that Caravelle to the 350. Not really by legislation, but what we've done is we've developed far more intuitive, much in some ways simpler, in some ways not, design of information that helps us. But this is reacting. So this is one of my favourite photographs of all time. Necessity is the mother of invention. Who said that? Edison said that, I think. I couldn't find it, but I think Edison said this. So the Wright brothers. I want you to think about the Wright brothers and their first flight, and think about what I've just been talking about, how technology drives a solution, and you have to have the problem before you have the solution. What piece of technology do we take for granted today in the flight deck that by definition the Wright brothers didn't need? Anyone think what it is? Not necessarily. It could have been introduced to them, perhaps. Here's a clue. I did this specifically for my French colleagues. TCAS. By definition, there wasn't a Monsieur Blériot about to try and steal the show. They did not need TCAS. By definition, they were the only aircraft in the sky. Now, think about that and how the world has changed. And you may have seen this video before, but this is now a description of what our world is today, just over 100 years later. Do you think the Wright brothers would have even been able to contemplate, when they didn't need TCAS, how much we need it today? This is quite a captivating image. It shows dawn over a globe. This is 24 hours in a day of aviation. Look at the explosion of European traffic as dawn comes, and you can see the two flows across the Atlantic and others. Oh, by the way, there's not a supersonic aircraft that goes over the North Pole. It's simply just a distortion. Fascinating, isn't it? Absolutely fascinating lithographic. So, think about the Wright brothers, think about necessity being the mother of invention, think about not needing TCAS and where we are today. And then let's look at some of the others. We've already mentioned this, so I'm going to rush over this just a little bit. The threat of mid-air collision, for example, we developed TCAS, that sort, and with legislation we're going to feed this back. But each time we're looking for the number one threat and solving it by technology, and then it's no longer the number one threat. So kind of like Sherlock Holmes said, once you've removed all of the number one threats, no matter how ridiculous, whatever's left becomes the number one threat. We're going to do a lot of work in Europe and in America with CSAR Next Gen, and we're going to have these direct routings with this enormous number of aircraft around the skies. We need to begin to visualize this. Pilots need to be able to be much more aware of the environment in which they're flying. If it becomes denser and we're not on strict lanes, we're all flying in different directions, we really are going to need to visualize this. And equally, we're going to have to think very carefully about our navigation skills. That old chart you saw on there, this is even in my own career, we've gone from that to this. And what we're trying to do, of course, is enhance situational awareness all the time. without really knowing how we're doing it. We're trying to help and enhance situational awareness. Thinking about that incredibly crowded skies, here's something that's going to come up, and already has to some extent. We now have absolute navigational accuracy. 25 years ago, we were lucky if we were in 2 kilometers. Now, 20 meters is easy. So the sort of thing we're going to see, and you can read this, the sort of thing we can see is what we can do with this kind of navigational accuracy. This is our NPAR, before and after. Same airport, 100-odd flights arriving. Repeatable. Okay? It's even better from the side. This is the same before and after, but this is from the side. Look at that. And I love the guy who did a little loop on the approach. But this is how our environment is changing. So imagine what this is going to do. The other area that's directly linked to this is we're now opening up the opportunity to go into airfields very, very accurately without any form of ground-based navigation at all. This particular airfield that I've worked in personally within China, look at that. Wow. Yeah. You know, before we had this, there was absolutely no way of getting in there. But now we can get in there very accurately, very safely, very repeatable. If you think that's complicated, you should see the go around. So that's the way the world. But let's go back to talking about navigate. This is something that I've mentioned to a few people. This is the seductive power of the navigation. This is actually already available on the 380, and we've come on the 350. What we now have is this amazing ground mapping facility. You can see exactly where you are, pink for some reason. White is another aircraft. It's like TCAS on the ground, and you can see where you are. It's absolutely wonderful. And for those of you who've ever taxied in and out of Charles de Gaulle, you can actually tell the air traffic controller, did you mean outer loop A? It's fantastic. We really know where we are. Brilliant. But it's seductive. How many of you here have actually driven a car with sat-nav in a TomTom or something? Yeah. Do you remember when you first switched on? It's incredibly seductive. You look at it and go, wow, look at the size of my neighbour's garden. Oh, I didn't know there was a shortcut that way. I've seen people in evaluations of this technology go right past the turning point they were supposed to be at because they were glued to being able to see where they are. So did it enhance their situational awareness or did it detract? No, I don't know either. Interesting, isn't it? We have to be cautious. Now what we talk about is layer upon layer of additional information. Some time ago there was a concern that we weren't making use of all the information we had available. Today there isn't time to have a crash, there's too much information for us. So what we're trying to focus on is the right information at the right place at the right time and making it intuitive. If it's intuitive, you'll use it. If it's intuitive, you'll engage with it and you'll know what to do and how to do it. So that leads me now to what I said about the number one threat today. The number one threat today for our fly-by-wire aircraft is actually going off the end of the runway. So we've developed a piece of technology called ROPS, used to be called ROROPS, and basically the aircraft tells you that you're either landing on the wrong runway, or if it's wet you need to use a bit more reverse, or things are a bit troubled. It also has the great benefit you can select an exit. So you can say, I want to exit here, and the aircraft will reach 15 knots about 20 meters before. It's absolutely brilliant piece of technology. But that's not enough for us. Okay? We will significantly reduce this. We've had 2 operational incidents so far that have proved the benefits of this technology. We think that it's about time that this became a legal requirement. But that's not enough. What we've done is we've made this freely available to all of the aircraft manufacturers around the world. If you want this, you want to put it in your airplane, we'll do it. Now let's talk about the pilots. We've said it's about 28,000 new aircraft. That's a lot. How are we going to cope? Here's an interesting graph to look at. This is the growth and demand for Airbus pilots over the next 10 years. See that? We need 50,000 new pilots. Where are they going to come from? And this is something that we have to answer as an industry. Think about this question. If you asked some kids 30 years ago, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you think they would have said? What was their motivation to do anything? How are we going to motivate pilots today? 30 years ago, they would have said astronaut. They would have said fireman. They would have said doctor, banker. The world's changed a lot in 30 years. And they would have said pilot. What do you think they say today? That's a really, you've seen this before, you cheat. This is interesting. It's none of that. They just want to be a celebrity. That's all they want to be, a celebrity. They don't care whether it's a sports star, pop star, or an actor. They just want to be a celebrity. They don't want to be a pilot. We need to change that. We want the best people in our industry, not the people who can't be celebrities. We need to think about how we pay them. One of the great disasters of recent times has been the fact that pilot's salary when you first start out is so low that it's no longer a motivator. In fact, it's quite the opposite. I'm going to have to spend how much to become a pilot and then get paid what? Do the maths? It doesn't happen. And we need to do something about it. One of the things we can do is by training. Briefly, and just to conclude my presentation, I'm going to look at the distant future, the far horizon. This is the Airbus concept aircraft. Okay. Looks pretty smart, doesn't it? I quite like that. It's got kind of like an exoskeleton. It doesn't have like an internal structure which opens up the volume. Here it is flying past New York. Here it is in a very funky version. Just to open it up, would work well over to society. What about the future flight deck then? This is where I'm going to be in so much trouble. It's top secret. So I have to share a little story with you. When the presentation police said, "Can we see your presentation?" They took a few slides out here. They said, "Will there be anybody from the union?" I said, "No, not really union. Well, Uwe's there, but he's not really union. He's a good guy. He's Lufthansa. We like him." No, union. And then they said, "Will there be any journalists?" I said, "No, not real journalists. I mean, David will be there, but nobody else." And they went, "Journalists, take the slides out." So it's top secret. What I can show you is a particularly handsome test subject having electrodes fitted prior to a long simulated night flight, testing a very clever piece of technology. I can't tell you what it does or how it does it, but they're measuring my brainwave activity to see when I become drowsy. And this little gadget predicted that every time it said, "Ooh," it just gave me a little warning, "Dave, you're just starting to," brilliant. Very simple, very brilliant piece of technology that we can put in our aircraft quite quickly. And that's about all I can say in that subject area. But it's very interesting. But what I can also confirm is we're not researching a cure for baldness. I'm sorry, Mike, I did try. The rest of it is top secret. I really have been told not to talk much more about that. But here's an image. Here's an image of a future flight deck. Or is it? Here you can see a captain standing in front of his adoring public, waving one hand intuitively in front of a control console, guiding his aircraft to bank right. Actually, it's not a flight deck. It's simply a viewing gallery on that concept aircraft, which is a little bit of a shame because I quite like that. I didn't fancy standing up for a long flight, but I like that. What else? What else can we say about the future flight? Here's something I can talk about. This is augmented reality. I'm sure some of you have seen this already. Here, we're 10 minutes from landing at Heathrow, and what the guy's done here is he's seen the London Eye, reached up, touched that point on the screen, on the window, and an augmented reality bubble has popped into here's the London Eye. Absolutely brilliant, wonderful, looking at air traffic and this thing. The only thing is, though it looks like it, again, this is not the flight deck, this is actually a cabin concept. But without saying anything more, you can imagine from this exactly what we're working on for the flight deck. And I didn't say it, that's good. So to conclude, each new year brings new technology and enhanced levels of safety. But the changing aviation environment brings new challenges for manufacturers, operators and crews. And we must evolve. Evolve. We mustn't get stuck in a rut of doing the same thing. In many ways, we're limited only by our imaginations. And we must never be afraid to dream and reach beyond our craft. Otherwise, we'd still have 5 crew and propellers. We have to dream and reach. When we do, as an industry, we must never forget the lessons of the past. Safety first, last and always. Whatever the future may look like, that imperative must remain. Fly the aircraft, fly the aircraft, fly the aircraft.